Welcome to our discussion of AI and comic books. What's the deal? I'm Heidi McDonald, the editor-in-chief of The Beat at comicsbeat.com, and also the co-host of More to Come, PW Comics World's podcast and comics news. So we've assembled a pretty august panel here to talk about this, and I'd like to introduce them. And then I'd like each person to give a brief, like a couple minutes, maybe position paper on AI, which is absolutely an incredible topic that we're all discussing right now. And just my own readings on it today, I'd just like to throw out there that, interestingly enough, human authorship has been a important right for copyright that goes back to all the way to the 19th century. And as an old geezer, I can definitely say that every time there's a technological improvement, people say it's going to kill creativity, whether it's digital, Photoshop or digital recordings or anything really, typewriters. So we know that hasn't happened yet, but is AI the biggest threat yet? We're going to find out. So I would like to welcome our panelists here. We have, you can just wave as I say your name, though you can see it on the screen. So we have Thomas Crowell, who's an attorney and author of The Legal Guide for Comic Book Publishers. We have Gamal Hennessy, another attorney. We have two lawyers with us tonight, author of The Business of Independent Comic Book Publishing. We have Mike Marts, who has been an editor for DC, Marvel, AfterShock, and presently editor-in-chief at Mad Cave, I believe. We have Andy Schmidt, who is a writer for Marvel and DC, a former editor at Marvel, and currently publisher at CEX Publishing. And Andrew T.S., who is a machine learning researcher at San Francisco State University. So he's going to tell us how smart these things can get. And finally, Mark Waid, a legend who needs no introduction, but esteemed comics writer. And as I like to say, the best editor I ever had. So let's get going. And, I'm going to start, let's start with Andrew, our machine learning expert here. So what can you tell us about AI? Briefly, just your relationship to AI, your little position paper in a couple minutes.
Okay. Hi. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm a machine learning researcher at San Francisco State University and Smith Cadwell Eye Research Institute in San Francisco. And I work on multimodal machine learning, which is vision and language for visually impaired and blind people. And so most of what we do is we're actually doing the vision part and translating it into text. But a lot of the developments that have been happening lately, these big, huge developments we've been seeing with what are called diffusion networks, like Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, and what's the other one, Midjourney, are taking text prompts and turning them into images, as and so this is kind of what brings us all here today. I have lots of mixed feelings. I don't know if I can get into a very concise answer inside of 2 minutes. I think it'll come out through this discussion. But my mind is very much that it's just statistics under the hood. Like you can replace AI with math, or computational math. And the fact that we've had massive developments in hardware and new algorithms has given us the ability to do this really impressive things, but they're still just math and statistics. So in a lot of ways, it's an amalgamation of what it's learned. And so, the networks only know what they've seen in their training data, whether it be text or imagery. And so I think that as far as artists go, they have a claim to some royalties and copyright infringement if their art has been used to train these algorithms. This is my belief, and I kind of agree in like the human perspective. It needs to be kind of done by a human. Yeah, I'll leave it there. That's kind of like my my teaser at this point.
All right, well, let's go over to the creator, Mark Waid. What's your position paper on AI? You're muted, Mark. So you're gonna have to, yeah.
I, like you said, Heidi, we've seen so much in the way of technological development in 40 years in comics that, like you said, every time something happens, we think it's catastrophic. it's easy to dismiss things because of that, but this is unlike anything. This is Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns in a way that we've never seen before in comics. And I think that what I see from people, what I see in terms of being combative about it, not combative, but dealing with it, is there seems to be an undercurrent of, well, if we just teach people, if we tell people, we make it clear to people if this is stuff that's being scraped, if it will somehow activate somebody's moral fuse, it'll go off or whatever. And I don't think that's true. I think that you can educate writers and you can educate non-artists all you want, but at the end of the day, every one of us is zooming in on some device that was made overseas by a 7-year-old. So, when it comes to technology, we will decide whether or not it's moral or not individually. And I think it's a harder bar to clear. I think that most people just won't care. And I think that's the real danger.
Well put. So let's go over to Mike Marts as the editor. Mike, how many AI pitches have you gotten so far?
Thankfully, none that I know of, right?
Mhm.
And that's part of the tricky part, is that with AI generated artwork, you can be easily fooled or not know when you actually see it. I've been doing this for about 30 years, and Mark Brooks, who was supposed to be on this panel, he's been drawing for over 20 years, and him and I were talking the other day about we weren't talking. I saw something that he has said on his social media where, he saw a piece of AI generated artwork and he thought it was original. Same things happened to me over the course of the past few months. Like, I saw something on Instagram, someone had a piece of artwork up, I liked it, and then someone called me out. Just someone in the crowd, like, hey, you said you didn't like AI generated artwork. Why did you like that post? So it can become really tricky, and it's a very sticky area. As a publisher or as an editor, we are gatekeepers, we're guardians, we are policing to make sure things like this doesn't creep into what we publish. We have a duty not only to the books that we're working on right now, but also everything that's come before. So we're trying to make sure that everything that is produced now for our comics is 100% original, because the contracts that Gamal has written for my company state that we are expecting to see 100% original artwork from people. And so we expect it to come in like that. So that's one area. And then, another thing is, like, if I'm still working at DC Comics and I'm working on the Batman books, and Jim Lee is a contracted artist to DC Comics, we also have to make sure that the use of Jim Lee's Batman isn't used somewhere else or in some way, shape, or form. So there's a lot of different areas of policing, of being the guardian, of being the gatekeeper, and it gets really tricky.
Absolutely. I believe we have Thomas Crowell has joined us now. Yeah, thanks for joining us. Well, and since he's the new kid, let's just go right. Actually, you know what? First, I'm going down the line. So let's go to Andy. Andy, you are an educator, a writer, an editor yourself. How about you? Are you seeing pitches from your students? Are students, using ChatGPT to fudge their homework?
Great question. I'm not aware of the fudging of homework as of yet, but similar to what Mike said, for CEX, the publishing company I run, we have clauses in our contracts that are very similar. Saying that the authors warrant that they are the creators of the work and all that. And then we also have a clause in our contract that tells creators that we will not, use, sell, license, any of that, all those sort of the laundry list of words, right? Like, there are to train AI. What we can't cover, or haven't figured out how to cover yet, is bad actors out there that, once art is out there for promotional use, it gets scrubbed by some saying, I don't know how to police or stop that. On the education side, I've had a lot of conversations with students. I also talk a lot with students at SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, and the professors there. And, you know, we're having conversations from how do you use it to teach to how do you integrate it as a tool. Like the one thing that we all seem to agree on is you can't ignore it. It doesn't seem to be going away. Also, we tend to agree with what Mark said, which is, yeah, sure, it'd be great if I told everybody like, hey, this, you know, it's unethical to do this because you're stealing the style of something you're not putting the work in, and that would stop consumers from consuming and buying it. But I think we all know that's not the way humans work. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. So it's still a journey, but we're trying to approach it, I think, as educators, and that's, you know, just a perspective that I have that's a little different. As educators, we're trying to approach it with how to discuss it, use it, and train people how to use it ethically, but also effectively.
Right, that's a great point. Now, Thomas, you sent along some cheat sheets for us along the way, and one of the things that I was interested is that you know, copyright law has kind of addressed the difference between humans and machines for hundreds of years. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if you gave the bios yet. Apologies for joining late. I was having some connectivity problems, but to sort of situate it here, I'm an attorney, I'm a law professor, and in the before times, before I turned to the dark side, became an attorney, I was actually a journalist and a science journalist at that. So it's sort of an interesting time to be studying this for me because I reported on it in the late 90s for Japanese television, and now we've sort of seen it come full circle. So the short answer is that at least since 1884 in the United States, largely as a result of a photograph of Oscar Wilde, we're able to draw a distinction in authorship between what a machine creates and what a human creates with the aid of a machine. And as we see with AI, it's a third thing. It's not, doesn't quite neatly fit into those categories. So one of the things that that has hit the, I think everybody who hasn't been deeply versed in copyright law, which I do believe has had the answer to a lot of this for a while, is this notion of, well, okay, what is protectable? At what point is art created, and more particularly a copyright created? Because there are 3 points that we really see a break with copyright law where there's a lot of tension. One is where we're web scraping. I hope we're going to get into that and sort of deal with how these training databases were produced. The second is how it goes about the process of generating art, and to what extent is that similar to a human mind creating art, and to what extent can we draw analogies to what a human does. And the third point is, can we protect it? The stuff that comes out, the resultant image that comes out, especially one without having been fed a training visual data, to what degree can we protect it? And I'll just button out on this and say that it's that last point there that those of us who want to try and help build some walls to protect the arts community, which I think many of us, you know, on this chat want to do. I think that you have to start by hitting people in the pocketbook. If it's not cost effective, if you're not going to give somebody a monopoly right to the copyright in AI generated artwork, then artists become a lot more attractive again. And that's a world that I'd like to see.
Absolutely, well put. And Gamal, you know, you also have the legal perspective, obviously. So what's your position on this topic?
Well, looking at it from a legal and business perspective simultaneously, because that's kind of the line where I sit, there's several things going on. And the first thing is, when Thomas is right in that copyright is actually answers a lot of the questions on the what I refer to as the back end of AI. Like when the image comes out, there is structures in place in copyright law to kind of make sure who actually can or cannot own, which means can and cannot sell, which means can and cannot make money from that art. But what's more fuzzy at the moment is the idea of the scraping of the images or of anything else that's used in the training data, because from what I've read and what I've seen, a lot of the companies are standing behind a concept of fair use. And fair use is a very tricky defense to actually use, especially right now, because the Supreme Court is maybe changing the rules of fair use as we speak. We could be in a situation where these companies have built their legal foundations on a concept that may not actually be relevant anymore if the law gets changed. But from the business side, there's so many pieces that AI can do that a lot of comic creators, especially independent and emerging comic creators, don't have time to do, don't have money to do, and to a large extent can't really be detected by people. So like companies can say, we won't use AI art in our books, but does that mean, or they won't use AI in the creation of their books, but does that mean if I made a script, because a script is not a final product, it's a piece of the product that no one's ever going to see outside the artist and the editor, if that was generated by AI, how would you know? And how would you stop it? If your marketing copy, your advertising copy, your sales data, the code for your website, all of these other things can be used, AI can be used for those things. So the idea of creating a situation where AI can be used and not abused is where we need to go. But the final thing I will say is, as a lawyer, technology always moves faster than the law. So by the time the law figures out what it is that we want to do, the technology has already changed. So it's the economics and the business of it itself that's going to have to a large extent, regulate things and get things into a proper perspective, because if you wait for the law to do it, it's going to be too late.
Absolutely. I think as opposed to, my own case, when NFTs came along, I understand some people like them, but, I didn't see any utility in them since we all own JPEGs and PNG files all the time. As a digital hoarder, I have thousands of them. But the minute AI came along, I was like, oh, now this is going to change everything. So let me just throw this out to you. I mean, what are the changes that have already been made in the business? I mean, like you said, Gamal, like the technology outpaces the law very quickly. But I mean, are we already seeing changes in the industry at all, or is this all still a big giant looming cloud? I'll just throw that out to the whole panel if anybody has a thought on it.
Well, I can get it started, because I know I have clients who have asked, can we put, and for want of a better word, anti-AI clauses into contracts? And can we, and certain platforms that were actually hosting comics, we're trying to figure out, can they actually host comics that had AI, or are they automatically violating some copyright from the images, and can they sell them? And so all of these things they were trying to do proactively. The answer is it's still a work in progress, because it's one thing to put words in a contract. We will not use your images to train AI. But if you can't actively do the thing you said in the contract, you set up a contract where you're breaching. You have to be able to execute on what it is you're saying. Otherwise, you shouldn't say it. So because people aren't in that position yet, it is still very much in flux.
Mark, you also had your hand up.
Yeah, I want to double back on where I think the distinction is for many of us. And I didn't mean to sound like Abe Simpson earlier in talking about, oh, all technology is bad. That wasn't what I'm not anti-AI. I'm not necessarily anti-AI art. I think the issue, more specifically for most of us, is the scraping. I think that is where our moral, lights go off. Everything goes fluey for us. I don't know. I would like to ask the rest of the panel: Am I being too reductive? Is that not the real issue here, or what?
I think that's the main issue. Yeah, I mean, because everything that I see and what little I know about how machine learning works versus what Andrew knows about it, is like the way that humans learn and evolve an art style is not that dissimilar to the way that a lot of the AI works. Like they go out, they try different things, and then there's a utility that goes, that worked, that didn't. and it just gets better and better, which kind of is how we do it, right? They just do it a lot faster.
Yeah. I mean, and we've seen a lot of AI generated, not a lot, but we've seen some AI generated comics that look, pretty good. And really, and I was far more in favor of them before it really sank in on me how much of where most of the source material was coming from.
Mark, I got to say, you and I are old enough to remember Shatter. Remember that?
Yeah, yes.
And that was the end of Human Artists. Of course,
Yep.
it was the first, computer done comic. But, Andrew, let me ask you, I joked about this before, how smart are these things going to get? We've seen that, you cannot make, this is my opinion, and, on the beat there, I will say there was a very good article that kind of runs down a lot of the AI comics that are out there. Most of them are free to read. And it's obvious that many of them have had human input. So, like the hands, you see immediately the hands are all messed up and all that sort of stuff. But, are we going to be able to train them? I mean,
the previous comments as well. It's going to get better. The hands is actually kind of a curious one, and it's because hands wrong. Is that even artists have trouble drawing hands, and so a lot of times
you're saying that Rob had to throw that in. Right,
and to back up just a little bit, one of the questions is like, what's the response, or how are things evolving? And I think that it's multifaceted. Really, it is saying, don't use me for training, and other sites are following suit. But how to actually enforce that is the question. And so people are creating. There's ways that you could kind of like embed steganographic information into your image so that it'll actually corrupt the AI when it tries to use it. But this is an arms race kind of approach. I think that ultimately what we need to do, or what's going to happen, is it may actually be, a more grassrootsy kind of thing, like organics or GMO, and people are going to demand, is AI inside or not? Like, I want the human behind the wheel here. And then even still, it may be difficult to discern. And so there's a lot of people that are having efforts that are creating other AIs to detect AI generated art and AI generated text, and so that's a thing as well. The scraping issue, I'm jumping around a little bit kind of to just like knock all these out of the park. The scraping issue is a weird one because, the web, people said if you put it on the web, it's public domain. But I think in this particular case, when people put things on the web, they realize that, fair use, people can say, oh yeah, it was on the web, it was in the public domain, I could then reuse it how I want. But I don't think anybody ever envisioned that this data would then be training an AI where the AI can now steal your style. And in the case of fair use, well, that's one of those stipulations of fair use. It's now impacting your ability to gather income from your own style. So I think that, we need to have some considerations in place there. I don't exactly know what they're going to be yet, but I think in the short term, there's going to be a lot of these little efforts popping up to try and detect your AI. And so detect your art being used in AI. So there's a site called Have I Been Trained, where you could actually look up your name and look up your, submit some of your art and see if it's been used in one of these AIs. And then you could also, the simplest thing to do is for any one of them, if you read the paper, there's a paper behind DALL-E, a paper behind Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, is look in the white paper, what data set was it trained on? Go find that data set, and usually there's a search engine in it, and you can start searching for your own art inside of that search engine. And so I think this is what a lot of people did with the and this is where gets into the legal thing where the other guys can talk more about this. Midjourney and Stable Diffusion are getting sued for their use of what Getty Images and some of these other popular art archive sites. And yeah, that's basically it. There people have done searches in there and be like, hey, you've used my stuff, I am due some royalties, you didn't ask me permission. And so I think that it's going to happen on all fronts. I think all of the above is going to be the answer. There's going to be a legal battle, there's going to be responses with AI, there's going to be people trying to detect themselves. Unfortunately, now this is the other problem that I see with all of this, and this is just kind of my forecast, is it's going to create greater inequity between the people that are small-time artists versus the big art houses that have the budget to have the lawyers and have the resources. Somebody had mentioned on the comments about like, what if you trained an AI exclusively on marble art? what would that create? It would create an AI that can generate more Marvel art. But Marvel is a big house that has the ability to back up their trademark and back up their style. And so they may hire a whole AI team to develop networks that are just detecting Marvel art and going after anybody who does anything that's similar to Marvel, that looks AI generated and is similar to Marvel. So that's a whole bunch of thought. I'll stop there.
Well, you mentioned some of the ways that people are guarding their images, and Thomas, again, you sent us some information about that. And can you talk a little bit about that part of it? It's kind of like a watermark that confuses the AI.
Is that to me or to Thomas?
To Thomas. Sorry. Yes, to Thomas.
Yeah. Okay, sure. And then, so I'll answer that, and then I want to sort of toss back to Andrew with a question I have, if I may, that's, I think, relevant to scraping. So we do have abilities to embed copyright protection information into imagery, and we have a law, the DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which, if you've ever gotten a notice and takedown on YouTube, you can thank the DMCA for that. And it gives you a set of tools, one of which says, hey, you can't remove my copyright security management portion of my copyrighted image. So we're going to see, so we're already seeing that in that lawsuit. We're seeing basically a laundry list of every claim you can think of stemming from copyright law, rights of publicity, trademark violations, unfair competition, all sorts of stuff. A lot of it, and this is my attempt at an artful segue into my question for Andrew, is going to rely, as Andrew said, on this data scraping, right? And I know in the comments there's some people who don't like that term. It is the term that is being used. So what I mean by it is having a bot that goes and it collects data, in this case, images from websites around the internet. Now, here's the question, Andrew. From a legal perspective, if I want to press a copyright infringement claim, I need to prove that I have a valid copyright and you have created something based upon my work that is substantially similar. That's the term of art, substantially similar to my work, and you don't have a good defense, and I can therefore hopefully win my copyright infringement suit. But with the diffusion model and the way it operates, I've read one of the white papers on it. It operates with a level of complexity that is doing something very different than some of the other software programs that I've used. And it's relatively, I think, 2017 or 15 that started coming up in the software started coming up. But I'm hoping you can sort of talk through for us how the diffusion model operates with specific attention to the adding noise, reducing noise, turning into mathematical algorithms, because until we, or at least I'm sure other people understand it, but at least I understand, how is it making these resultant images? Because therein lies the effectiveness of the claim. If I can show, let's say I'm on the side defending AI art, if I can say, hey, it's not copying. Yeah, okay, fine. It took a minor copy on the web. Yeah, you can get me for that. But the minute it turned it into an algorithm, into a set of expressions that is now comparing with other similar expressions to create a third image, we're doing something a little different than just taking a portion and bringing it over. We're actually using it to generate a new thing entirely that may not have any visual or perceived elements that are in common with the work it took it from. And unless I can show that, unless I can say this is substantially similar to that, I will lose a US copyright law claim. So that to me is the billion-dollar question, is how is this stuff working, and to what degree can I analogize it to somebody going on the web, viewing something, copying it, and then me bringing an infringement claim?
Great question. You did a pretty good job explaining diffusion, and you're right. And I think that this is a challenge. Exactly what you're saying. It reminds me of that story of the guy who had a photograph and then did a painting that was exactly 180, but it was nearly identical painting. And how do you differentiate, is that an original work or not? And it was a painting of a photograph, which is like, well, the human actually painted this whole thing, but they lost that copyright case, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong on that, if it was enforced or not. In the case well, okay, so a couple points. One is I've been thinking about this a whole lot, exactly that. How could you prove this? And one way that I think would need to be tested in court would be you can actually train another network, yet another network, another artificial intelligence to be a discriminator. And this is kind of what I was just getting at in that last bit of info, was that like if you trained a discriminator to detect Marvel art, and then you ran this discriminator on this new art that somebody generated, and it had a very high probability or high confidence that that was actually trained from some of this copywritten art. Now, what would be the threshold there? Would that be compelling? I don't know. You know, like that's to be tested. And in certain cases where you've got something like, and this is exactly to your point, you're totally right. With diffusion networks, they're different than the old style image generators that were just saying, well, give me an image that's near this image, and or like I'm trained on 3 images and I'll give you the average of these 3 images, you know, which kind of sounds like a fusion filter in Photoshop or something like that, like a morph filter, right? And you just stop somewhere in the middle. You know, diffusion, what it's doing, it's a denoising process. And so what they do is they actually take the original image and they add Gaussian noise. Think of snow on your television, right? And so you add a little bit of noise into that, and then you train a network to unnoise it. So it's a denoising diffusion network. And you do this progressively over several iterations of noising. And eventually you can just give this network pure noise and it'll imagine new imagery. And so when it's imagining completely new imagery, how can you really prove that? And I think that it becomes a new argument at that point. Like at that point, like what is it? OpenAI hired Scott Aronson, who is a guy from MIT, who's saying that we're going to be able to embed meta information so that OpenAI can detect OpenAI's stuff. And that's yet to be seen if that's even possible. I think with diffusion networks that it will be undetectable. Like, how can you actually do that? They may be able to watermark their own stuff, but you're not going to be able to just detect anybody who just ran this off the shelf on their own. And so I think that the argument may actually become like sort of like trademark enforcing, like, you know, the Hulk is green. You're using a substantially green character who's all hulking, you know, that's our trademark. And so you're going to have to actually identify these pieces of information that was clearly from this copywritten source and say, well, that's where the steal is coming from. That's where the infringement is happening.
Mark, I know you had.
I don't know how well that'll hold up either.
Mark, you had your hand up. You had a comment.
Yeah, another question for the panel, really, which is just playing devil's advocate here. We know what we are doing and can do that AI cannot at this point. What is AI doing that we're not? I mean, if I want to learn how to draw, again, playing devil's advocate, I go look at Jim Lee pages and I go look at Neil Adams pages and I absorb and I process. And that is, you know, that is how all art is created. We all pull from different sources. How is that different than what's happening now with AI?
It's cheaper.
Human behind the wheel. Sorry.
Yeah, it's economics. The economics, I think, you know, make it, if there's no ethical issue, you have, and we can solve for some of the, I mean, randomness is built into the way that these diffuse images are generated, but if we can get it a little bit closer, it's going to be economically more viable for some people to say, let's get this person out of art school to do it rather than go to an established creator because the person's straight out. Yeah,
there's no question. But again, I was just to give clarity, I was looking for is there anything that AI is doing that we don't give advice to artists to do the same thing?
Well, I'd love to hear from Mike and Andy about that, since, you know, I'm sure you're seeing some of this stuff, and you know, I have looked at some AI comics that were made in good faith, you know, that were definitely not just rip-off stuff. And, you know, my first question is, can you make an AI comic that isn't about cyberpunk? Because that's a real serious question. I mean, they definitely seems to be very suited to that topic. But yeah, I'd love to hear what Mike and Andy have to say about that.
Well, I think I was just going to add something on to what Thomas was saying. there's the idea that it is cheaper, but the other thing is that it is so much quicker. Normally, even with the quickest of artists, I might have them draw an issue in a month, and then it's colored another 2 weeks later. So that's 6 weeks. Whereas something like this, could be done in a fraction of the time. So I mean, that's another thing that this can do, which the normal process cannot. Makes it really dangerous. But I'll pass it over to Andy.
Well, one of the things that I'm seeing with, especially tends to be the younger crowd of artists that I'm seeing, is somebody mentioned in the chat about inspiration versus imitation, right? And that humans are inspired by art, whereas the machines are imitating art. The opposite is happening as well. So I'm running into a lot of students that are putting things into Midjourney, just kind of almost like mishmash stuff. Like, man, wouldn't it be cool to see what Boris Vallejo crossed with Barry Windsor Smith, crossed with Jack Kirby or whatever, looks like doing this, this, and this, these things that never actually happen. And then it spits out whatever it does. And then they're drawing inspiration from that and then going, that looks cool, I want to make that thing, right? And so it's actually, it can work both ways. And so a lot of the ways that I'm seeing the students use it is they'll create images and then use them as reference or inspiration and that sort of thing. There's a lot of, I think, ethical ways to do this. And it would be very hard to make an argument, I think, legally or morally to say, if you put in stuff like that, it generates an image and you're inspired by the image. How is that different from going on a vacation and going to New Zealand and being like, this place is beautiful, we should make a Lord of the Rings movie here? So I'm seeing, as much as we love to say that, like, it's our heart, it's our, our imagination, it's whatever it is that makes us human, that also makes us very special. But the reality is, I think we went from, and I don't remember the name of that Batman comic is that what you referenced earlier?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, I remember that coming out and being like, whoa, look nothing like humans drew, right? And, and then we're starting to get like, we're at the point where the movies were, we did Tron, which was the first like digital special effects. We're up to around a couple of years back, I would say, with what's the Christmas movie with Tom Hanks, the animated one?
The Polar Express.
Polar Express, right?
Uncanny Valley
Really,
Express.
Really good, except like dead eyes and things like that. There were a few problems, and now we're at a point with Pixar and stuff where the digital characters emote better than humans do. So I think we're on a similar trajectory, but just like a Pixar didn't put out, physical actors from making live action films, I don't know that it has to be all or nothing. I just don't know how we're going to get to a balance that doesn't undercut pricing. I think that's really what one of the biggest concerns is in the art community is, are my page rates, especially if you're in comics, which are already super low, going to go down because I can't keep up with this, and then I can't afford to do the thing I love. Also, I just want to point out that Scott Doombeer is not officially on the panel, but a lot of us know who he is. Did have his hand up, I think. So if he has a point, it's probably worth listening to.
Yeah, Scott. Scott, can you be unmuted? I don't think I can unmute you, but there you go. Yeah.
Heidi, you can't possibly stop me from talking, as you know. I just wanted, two things. I have one question, and then I wanted to make a comment on what Andy said. Having worked in comics for a very long time, a big part of it is, if you have a licensed comic, having changes made, tons of changes. Are you able to do that? I'm a total novice on AI. So are those able to be addressed by AI? And secondly, Andy, what you said is true about things like Polar Express and Dead Eyes and improving, but all of those companies, Pixar and whoever did Polar Express, they still have human beings working for hundreds, sometimes thousands of hours to create that look. And with AI, you're kind of circumnavigating that. You're taking the human element out of it. And, I don't know, I find horrible ethical dilemmas about this, personally. So that's it. I've killed the room.
No, I think
Can I
you.
just respond
you hit
real
a-
quickly to that? Because
Please.
I just want to clarify that I was not trying to say that like that yeah that we're gonna put people out of work, because the only AI art that I've seen that or writing that I've seen is heavily involved with a human, at least one human.
Yeah.
There may be an AI generated piece of art or writing, but somebody has to go in. They still have to shape it and edit it and redraw the hands, you know, what we mentioned earlier, and all that sort of stuff. So there are definitely people still working on these when they are working. And so I think I unintentionally made the point you referenced, but that wasn't actually what I was trying to.
Oh, no, that's fine. I guess my big concern is, you know, the idea that somebody, you know, like you said, could want to do Frank Frazetta, Barry Smith, Boris Vallejo, and mash it all together. That's where it gets really dicey for me. You know, I mean, if it's AI art that is something, you know, like you said, you go to New Zealand, you're inspired, you do that on your own. That's a different thing than stealing Boris Vallejo, Barry Smith, Neil Adams. And
Can
those
I, I want to hear what Mark has to say, but I want to point out that, you know, it's interesting what you just said, because I do think Boris Vallejo had made a human intelligence study of Frazetta, you know, when he first started. I mean, he was aping him so much, and, you know, humans had been doing that. So, you know, I don't know. I want to hear what Mark had to say. I do think eventually we're going to become accepting of these in some way, and it's
But that's inspiration. There's a
Yeah.
difference between
Yes.
being, I mean, you know, I mean,
we call it inspiration now.
anyway.
Well, that's
but-
right, Scott. That was what I was going to say. Is that I think Andy nailed it, which was using inspiration versus imitation, and that is, we are at the point. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you can call what AI is doing at this point an act of inspiration. When it hits that point, that would be the real tipping point, right? I said to everybody in the room, just in case anybody hasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, has anybody seen anything that struck them, that, you know, that really struck at
Yes.
you? Is that kind of inspiration? Has people seen stuff? Andrew?
I have a question for the panel, actually. Joe Dorowski's Tron that somebody had made, you know, they asked Midjourney to draw a bunch of images, and they actually did some post editing. So they added the fonts and they did some graphic design and they did a whole layer on top of it. You know, now that's categorized as fan art and fair use, but if they were to go and try and publish that as a book, it's all original derivative art from Diffusion Network. Would that infringe upon a copyright that Disney holds, you know, for Tron? That's kind of,
If they called it Tron and they were trying to use the trademark in Tron to actually sell more copies of the book, that would be a trademark violation. It would not, they could go after them for copyright too, but the primary thing is, if you're using the name, image, likeness, the sound, the things that are actually protected by trademark to sell your stuff, that is where trademark infringement comes from. And I think one of the claims that's actually being made in all these cases is that if you take your prompt in Stable Diffusion and you put in trademarked words, then by definition, you are attempting to create something that is leveraging the pre-existing popularity of that thing. You didn't put Hulk in your prompts just for fun. You put Hulk in your prompts to actually look like Hulk, attract Hulk readers, attract people who like Hulk. So if there was a way in terms of metadata, in terms of, like, for example, if the courts came down and said every prompt has to be embedded in every image, then there would be very few ways for people to submit art, especially digitally, to publishers and say, well, this is my art, because then someone could look under the hood and say, you use Todd McFarlane, you use Barry Windsor Smith, and if there was, like Spotify, for all of you who are old enough to remember Napster and LimeWire, the reason that we have Spotify and iTunes and things like that is because they were built off of the destruction of LimeWire and Napster legally, so that there was a way for people who had their work used to get paid for it. Now, if you're a musician and you're getting paid from Spotify, you know you're not getting paid that much, but you're getting something, as opposed to the way the system is now where you're not getting anything. So I think if that change can be made, and if every prompt was visible for every image, people would quickly either stop using people's trademark stuff because you don't want to get sued by Disney, or they would do something else. But in that way, you could actually start to pay the people whose artwork is being used, which is one of the issues that people are upset about.
Right. Well, if you're going to go with the Spotify route, I mean, if you're going to go down that road, then you're going down a road where Marvel and DC develop tools by which they say to people, you can draw your own Marvel comics.
Yes. If you pay Marvel, yes.
Right.
Yes. For a monthly fee of $39.99, yes, you can make your own Marvel.
You can draw Marvel comics, yes.
Yeah, and if I may, I think there's also areas of the law that even with that legislation, we'd have to make adjustments to both copyright and trademark. So on the style, right? I keep hearing speakers say, well, they're copying in the style of so-and-so. That's not protectable by copyright. But as hard as that sounds, as bitter a pill as that is to swallow, what's copyright protected is if I copy Frazetta, Vallejo, whoever's actual image. But if I do a similar style, no. So as Gamal pointed out, okay, maybe there's something in trademark law here you can look to. If trademark law looks at passing off, am I pretending to be Gamal, but I'm actually Thomas, but I'm riding on Gamal's coattails? To the extent that I'm using it in a trademark sense, like I'm slapping it on a can of soda or in a commercial or TV commercial, then that's easy. But if it's in a First Amendment protected work, and this is where trademark goes, because it's basically commercial speech. So there are a lot of areas and cases that are on the book which say, hey, I get that they're kind of doing your thing, but it's in a First Amendment protected work. So we have to look a little bit farther. It's harder in general to bring a claim under trademark for an expressive work that is using the trademark than it is a copyright claim.
And yet, didn't the Supreme Court rule on that just recently with the Glenn Howman work, the Star Trek Dr. Seuss mashup?
Sure,
because the verdict was said that style
it wasn't fair use, right? It wasn't fair use, and because what they had done is they had the places you will boldly go, right? So there's a direct pulling from Dr. Seuss on that, as opposed to, I'll give you another case that dealt with something similar. Another Dr. Seuss case in the 90s, that is to the O.J. Simpson trial, where they had the cat not in the hat. And they used Dr. Seuss iconography and rhyme scheme to basically portray the O.J. Simpson trial. And that case was found to be infringing because it had no connection with Dr. Seuss. It was just using the Dr. Seuss iconography to, to comment on something else. So
we do have Glenn here in the audience with his hand up. So Glenn, if you have anything you'd like to throw in there.
Just briefly, hi everybody. I'm the plaintiff in the aforementioned Seuss comic mix case, so I can speak.
Oh, excellent!
Good to meet you. Serious. Hi, pleased to meet you. Specifically, the Seuss sued us over both copyright violation and trademark violation and unfair competition. The trademark thing was laughed out of court outright. It was basically the argument was because, again, to remind people, trademark is a brand identifier, that it actually states outright, basically, for example, in this particular case, is this book Dr. Seuss or not? And we didn't say anywhere on there that this was a creation of Dr. Seuss. This is not anything to do with Dr. Seuss. It had nothing, that it was not there. And that in trademark, as you're familiar with the case of Rogers versus Grimaldi, for you law school fans out there, that as long as there is some artistic expression in use of it, you can make use of the trademark material. Now, getting back to the argument as to whether or not you can trademark or copyright a style, that also came up in our case, and the answer is no. You cannot copyright a artistic style. The fact that it's called a style, that when we talk about somebody's trademark style, is an accident of language, but it's not the legal term that's involved there. So as far as that goes, no, you can't. If somebody wants to sit down and do something in a particular artistic style, you can only copyright and trademark fixed expressions of work. You can only something that is basically put down on paper and put in place. That's the only thing you can copyright and trademark. You cannot trademark a style. You cannot trademark a vibe. You can't do any of that other stuff. And as far as when the judges went back to kick and say, no, you can't do it. Well, we don't think it's fair use because we don't think it's transformative. By an amazing coincidence, I actually happen to have a book about here that actually discusses the entire thing in detail, but that's a major digression we're not going to get into this moment. Suffice to say that the issue of whether or not it was fair use never made it to a jury, which was the next place that it was supposed to go. It was supposed to go in front of a jury, and then our artist came down with stage 3 colorectal cancer, so we basically said no.
So I'm sorry, I have two questions. One is, when you say you can't copyright a style, I completely get that. I mean, obviously, you have Dick Giordano drawing like Neil Adams. You have all these different guys drawing like other people. But if you're specifically putting in, do this like a specific artist, isn't that a little bit different? And the second thing is, I'm wondering about the Amy Grant case, because what happens if an AI program does an image of a celebrity like Amy Grant, who brought suit against Marvel Comics, and I don't know if it ever went to trial or if they just settled, but Marvel lost that. What happens if AI does something like that? And it's aware of it on the editorial side, it gets printed,
I'd like to hear from our legal experts on that, if they have any thoughts.
Well, when you start to look at things like name, image, and likeness rights, those are different types of rights than copyright and trademark. So if you say, for this example, like you put into Stable Diffusion, give me a character that looks like Zendaya, and then all of the images, you make an entire comic that looks like Zendaya. Now you are in a situation where you are using her name, and especially if you're selling this comic, you're using her name to actually make a profit, you're violating her image and likeness rights, but that would be a separate claim not related to their trademark or their copyright.
And there's a right of publicity. Most right of publicity, what one of the things Gamal is talking about, is a state by state. And New York has just added, as of 2-3 years ago, a section to its right of publicity law that allows actors to bring a suit if their digital AI is being used, an avatar is being created and used for commercial purposes without their permission. So, but that's not a federal law. That's not a copyright law. That's a special right of publicity that is given by the state of New York.
This also crosses over a lot with the deep fake issue, which, there was a lot of law emerging about. So I guess we're at about an hour, so I'm going to try to wrap this up a little bit, but it just sounds like we're all going to have to work a lot harder, doesn't it? This human intelligence might have to work a lot harder, and are we up to it? Are we ready for this? Is there too much on our plate to begin with?
I just want to announce today that I'm going to be doing an AI artist edition next week. So.
Nice.
You want me to jump in on that, Heidi?
Sure, yeah.
As well, because I 100% have the right answer here, because that's gonna be easy. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're not real good at this. I mean, if it were just one nation, one set of laws, one sort of moral philosophy, like my undergraduate degree is in philosophy and specifically in ethics. I mean, there's all these different ethical systems. There's these different societal mores, different laws all over the place. So if we just get rid of all the people that suck that would use this inappropriately, like that's the only way it's going to work. But I don't really condone that either, because that sounds a lot like Thanos snapping his fingers, which I recall being bad. So I don't know that we're going to come up with a solution. But with all things, I always wind up kind of coming down to it's the individual. Like, it's how can I move this thing forward today, or with the project that I'm working on? Can I make sure, you know, kind of like a doctor, like do no harm is step one, and then work from there. But yeah, it's not going to be solved. And yeah, it's
not going to be solved in an hour. Mike, does Mad Cave have any policy about AI yet?
In our contracts, no, you know, but publicly, different members of the company have come out, you know, basically saying that AI artwork that was using other people's images without their permission would not be tolerated in any way. You know, I think what this does to like, you know, my job or Andy's job is that the vetting process of artists becomes that much more difficult and labor intensive, and there are additional steps now that are added on. You know, previously you would look at someone's portfolio and say, yeah, what work have they done before? Let's see their sequential pages. Let's check out their Instagram, and that might be enough. You know, this adds extra layers to the vetting process. So it's, you know, but it's in front of our faces. It's not going away. We've got to find out ways to deal with it.
I'm muted. Andrew, what is the next big, what's the next big looming AI achievement ahead of us here? What should be on the lookout for?
GPT-4 is due out this week, and it's going to be multimodal. And this is going to mean that you're going to kind of have a fusion of what ChatGPT is doing with what these diffusion networks are doing. And I think that it's going to be generating music next. I mean, we already have networks that can generate convincing music, but I think that they're going to show this sort of creativity that some of the visual diffusion networks have been demonstrating that have been so mind-blowing. So I think that that's the next thing, and it's like this week on the horizon.
Coming at us fast. Thomas and Gamal, is the law going to be up for this? Is there enough law?
There's always enough law. It's just whether it's the right law. So I think the law, as Gamal said, is already in place. And I gotta do a little bit of a pat on the back of Gamal and me and Jeff Trexler and a couple of we were talking about all this stuff at New York Comic Con this year before the cases were filed. Gamal, am I wrong? We pretty much identified all of the complaints and how they were going to shake out. So it's not that the law isn't ready for it. Literally, there was a discussion group started in the early 1960s in Congress to deal with AI art. This is one of those areas where people were very aware of this for a long time on the horizon. But there's one of the people who's listening to this made a really great comment that I'm so glad you did, and it's this, and it's a bit of a downer, but it's, we tend to think of what's best for art, what's the greatest, how do you get to good art? Most companies don't care about good art. If I'm a stock photography house, if I'm doing a shot of a beer bottle and I want a flame broiled bar look in background, I don't care about the copyright of that photo. So the photographers, the visual artists, the illustrators, all of the people who are doing these sort of day-to-day, I used to be a graphic artist, way back in the day. So I know a lot of the work we do is just very everyday stuff. And that's the market sector that I believe is going to be impacted the most.
Well, I'll give the last word to the human here. Mark, are you ready?
I am. I better be ready. I think that it's, as you say, it's only going to get better faster. I think that the only person in the comments I've wanted to shove into a volcano so far is the one who said, well, the answer is just make better art and do better work. And that makes me insane, because that really is just, you think you're being funny, but it's ignoring a whole host of ethical and moral issues that are being brought up here. I don't think anybody here is saying, oh, all AI art should go away. It's really just the issue of what is inspiration versus what is imitation.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking for myself, I've, already been hearing people to make comics, and I'm sure all of us here who have made comics and know that there's so much to do with the most minute things in the artwork and then placement and which character is on the left and which is on the right. I mean, there's a lot of details. I am not convinced that just prompts will make good comics.
No,
just
AI is not going to help. AI is not going to help you
No.
when Paramount says we wouldn't like Kirk's hairline to be different,
right.
right?
Yeah. And so the human touch is good for now, but more to come, as we like to say. So this is great. I have learned so much from this conversation, and I really have. And thank you so much, everyone, Mike and Andy, Andrew, Mark, Gamal, Thomas, and special guests Scott and Glenn, and all the great questions, which we didn't have time to get to, but we're just scraping the surface, to use a bad word. So
Right.
thank you so much, everyone. To really appreciate you taking the time and to speak. And like I said, as we like to say on our My PW podcast, there will be more to come.
Absolutely. Thank you
having
very
us.
much, Heidi, for managing all of these geniuses in one discussion. This video, if you came in late or if you didn't hear something, or if you want to share this with someone else, this will actually be available on the Comics Connection YouTube channel by the end of the week. So we will send the links out to everybody who attended, just if you want to see it again. And if you want to find out more about what we're doing over at Comics Connection, not just in talking about AI, but talking about the entire business and creative process of making comics, you should visit us at comicsconnection.net. But with that, we're going to thank everybody for showing up, and we will see you next time. Have a good night, everybody.